Okay, so I said I would be gone, but I'm back. Uh, I don't know how the microphone is on this. I don't have the other microphone. Let me grab it real quick. So I'm back. Um, just gonna go over some quick articles. This is interesting that people are talking about this in other countries. So this is from a EU/US blogactive.eu. So this is coming from the Europe, even though it says commentary from the US. This article, and then we're going to also talk about this is an article about Steve Bannon and his role in basically serving what is the continuation of the Pan European Union. So Steve Bannon is the successor in this article's idea of Kalergi and Otto von Hapsburg. Um, so one of the men very directly tied to Trump, even though he wasn't. I don't think he was nearly as important as others, but very directly tied to Trump and Breitbart News and all of these things, is part of the Pan European Union movement. Now, this is a fairly short article, and then we're going to read um, another article about the Gladiator School that is both in what is supposedly a Nazi, former Allgemeine SS headquarters in Regensburg, which belongs to Gloria Taxis, was a Hapsburg, and also an abandoned monastery in Europe. So here's the article. It's called Steve Bannon, Not the First American Aiming to Steer the EU Politics. An interview with Count Christian Diadlau, Hombourg, historian, financier, and French politician, formerly PanEuropa's Secretary General. He currently holds the presidency of a Strasbourg jurisdiction of PanEurope. He is also the president of the Federalist Party in Alsace. Is Steve Bannon trying to create a transnational nationalist party along the lines of the transnational Federalist Party that you are president of in Alsace? Before I continue to talk about Steve Bannon, I want to say on the record that I am embarrassed to be an American at the moment, having an American come over and try to influence European politics in such a negative way. Bannon, we know, is influenced by UKIP and different leaders within other already established right wing groups. Isn't it interesting that UKIP, which I think is aligned with the Conrad Black, uh, Lord Conrad Black media empire, which worked with the Scaife media empire to dig up things like Whitewater and all of that on Clinton. Um, I think UKIP falls into that. Isn't it interesting that they think that the British are influencing Bannon rather than evil American, um, evil Americans? See, people in mainland Europe actually think that the British have influence. Isn't that amazing? Aren't the nationalists copying the Federalists by trying to create a transnational nationalist party, or is something different? And then the Count Christian Dianlu Homburg from Pan Europe says, no, they're not copying it. Us, they're exact opposite of us. The exact opposite, but sometimes the opposite are meeting when. Reply, well, when copying in the idea of uniting. He says, yes, you said the transnationalist lists. Reply, yes, yes. Count says, I understand what you mean, but they're not copying us. Everybody has the same idea. All the parties in Europe are, I suppose, all of them. The idea of being transnational and French socialist, I would like to have German socialist, Italian socialist on a very modest level. Very modest level. But we have done it now. To come back to Mr. Bannon, you're asking how an American influence would be received in Europe. I don't know. I personally don't think it's a problem. First of all, I must tell you that I'm half American. My mother was American, but I'm also half European, so I don't see whether it's a problem or not. Subheading: America CIA financed both Richard Goldenherve Kalergi and Jean Monnet. As I've told you 2 minutes ago, the founder of the PanEurope was Richard Goldenherve Kalergi. He was financed by American Freemason friends from the beginning of his thing back in 1925 until he retired in 1972. This article is pretty badly written, actually. Um, it, it is goofy they say Freemason, but if you understand maybe a traditional European, the free and accepted masonry of Benjamin Franklin is actually where the word Freemason comes from. I think beforehand, people were known as Masons, but not Freemasons. And the French, too, had the same kind of thing, but it was called Free and Accepted Masons, different from the primitive Scottish Rite and things like this. Anyway, going, it's no secret this is not classified information, it's declassified information that Jean Monnet, one of the founding fathers of Europe, was a member of the Central Intelligence Agency. And the agency has declassified this document, so now it's common knowledge. I presume in the newspapers of the most serious newspapers in France and in the other European countries, we have always suspected that Germany was a U.S. agent, but now we know. Um, he says George Soros is also a U.S. citizen. So Mr. Bannon or George Soros are American citizens. I'm not sure if George Soros is a citizen. He is a citizen of the United Kingdom, which he is, I am sure of, but many may also be a U.S. citizen. Is the fact that Mr. Soros or Mr. Bannon are U.S. citizens a problem for them to indulge in European politics? I don't think so. I don't think so, not especially today in the time of globalization. Subheading: Elected officials in France from foreign cultures. We have some people in France who are culturally more far away from the French culture. They are elected in France as mayors of some villages, sometimes even mayors of some cities, and who are elected at the parliament, and sometimes even they can become ministers. They come from foreign cultures foreign to Europe, more far away than the US, so I really don't see where the problem is. Goldenherve Kalergi used to say that he wanted a pan-European union from San Francisco to Vladivostok. That was one of his motives from San Francisco to Vladivostok, which is nice. I like the idea. Subheading: In a federalist democracy, the nationalist voice must be heard. Going on. So the fact that an American, Mr. Bannon, comes into European politics is not shocking for me. I wouldn't like to see him succeed and break the Union, as he said that he would, but I'm very happy to see him come and see him confederate the Nationalist Party in Europe, because these people must have a voice. If we want to have a democratic European Union, we need these people. We need them, and we need to hear the voice. Subheading: Are the Federalists and so these are the questions, the subheadings. Are the Federalists and Nationalists like the second party, the two-party system in the U.S.? So then it would become an almost two-party system like the U.S. has. We have the Republicans and Democrats, and you're saying Europe would have the Federalists and Nationalists. So see how they're building a new dialectic for Europe in a Apollinian and Dionysian uh, consolidated parties. And your only options are the Pan-Europeans and the Nationalists, which from the beginning were already working together. So people like Karl Haushofer, who helped write Mein Kampf, was working hand in hand with Kalergi. Kalergi learned from him. And the same thing with the Turn and Taxis family, which is sponsoring Bannon, who was basically Hapsburgs, and also ran the Pan-European Union. So he goes on to say, well, there's not much of a difference. This is what he says between the two. Excuse me, I don't know what your political opinions are. I don't want you to hurt your own political convictions, but there is a much greater difference, a constitutional difference seen from Europe. There's not much of a difference between Democrats and Republicans in the USA. As it is said in French, it is blank bonnet or oui bonnet manque. But between a Federalist Party like ours, a Nationalist Party like Mr. Bannon, wants to confederate or federate, I don't know. It's a solid move. It's the day or night. It's really the opposite, like the Front National in France. So we totally disagree on everything, but I think that these people are sincerely democratic, just as we are. As the French philosopher Voltaire used to say, "Sir, I totally disagree with you, but I shall fight for your right to say what you want to say." So this is an interview about Mr. Bannon, and I guess I was wrong to say he was the successor, but as we see, there's no degrees of separation between Bannon and Gloria Turner-Taxis, who was very close to Dr. Otto Hapsburg, who ran the Pan-European Union, is right there. Is sponsoring Steve Bannon. Um, Going on, so here's an article from FT.com, Financial Times. It's called Steve Bannon's Alt-Right Academy and One Village's Fight to Stop It. One of the most influential figures in Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, Bannon spent 4 years before that election running Breitbart News, turning it into the single platform for the disparate right-wing elements of modern America, from pro-lifers and climate change deniers to white supremacists. Since being ousted from his position at the White House chief strategist in 2017, he has shifted his attention to Europe, helping launch the Brussels-based The Movement, a right-wing think tank to support nationalist anti-establishment groups. With European Parliament elections to be held later this month, Bannon is attempting to reinvent himself as Europe's high priest of populism. Notice when we talked about H.G. Wells and pan-European socialism, they had the high priest of science. Well, now they have the high priest of populism. Uniting nationalist parties in shared opposition to immigration, progressive liberal values, and the EU itself. Drawing on his expertise in polling messaging slogans and data targeting, he has toured European capitals, touting himself as a mentor to the new breed of strongmen, such as Italy's Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini and Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban. While a number of Europe's right-wing leaders have sought to keep Bannon at arm's length in Italy, his Christian-centric, pro-family, and vehemently anti-abortion message has tried with ultra-conservative Catholics. With their help, he is finalizing preparations for the opening of an alt-right academy in the monastery in the mountains above Anagyi. Anagyi. Anagni. Bannon plans to turn this unlikely location into the center of European network of finishing schools for ultra-conservatives, the Academy of the Judeo-Christian West. So here you have supposed Nazis, once again, working with this Hofjuden networks, or supposed anti-Semites, the people that would like you to believe they're anti-Semites, founding themselves in the protection of Judeo-Christian values. And the way they cover this up is they have friends in the media on the left that promote them as anti-Semites. Serve as an incubator for national leaders of the future. Rokaseka is part of a motley alliance of anarchists and local civil servants and housewives, politicians and eco-warriors, who hope to frustrate Bannon's ambitions in Italy. The location of the academy in the monastery at Trisolti, a former Carthusian charter house buried in oak forest on a mountainous ridge, is particularly contentious, they say, given the core Christian values of compassion and love, and Pope Francis' repeated call for Roman Catholics to protect migrants and refugees. With a century-old medicinal herb garden and pharmacy and a library of more than 30,000 books, many relating to the early medicine, the monastery represents knowledge and culture, says Rokaseka. And who cares about this Rokaseka woman? It talks about her Jack Russell Terrier, blah, blah, blah. The rebels' goal is local, blocking Bannon's personal European project from opening on the holy ground of the monastery, but they see themselves as foot soldiers in the ideological showdown that is playing across the globe. Trisolti is becoming the center of the worldwide struggle against fascism and nationalism. Rokaseka says we have already been poisoned by the industry here, but this is another kind of poison, more subtle and insidious. On a misty Saturday morning in March, with snow on the mountain peaks, about 100 demonstrators gathered to march on the monastery. Blah, blah, blah. Blue, blue, blue. As a traditional community of agricultural smallholders and factory workers with an increasingly elderly population, it is hardly a hotbed of radical politics. Rosalia Rodinera, a grandmother whose townhouse overlooks the village piazza, objects to Bannon's plans for the monastery, but is not of the march, as she is suffering from a leg injury. How could I walk miles up the mountain? She asked, adding that she has never been on a demonstration. And they go on and on. Less about, they don't actually talk about anything that's actually happening. They talk about stupid activists as usual. This is a tendency in modern journalism. Uh, I don't know, man. I would like to find more. According to, okay, so here, let's talk about this MP. Just one MP, Nicola Frattuani from the tiny leftist Free and Equal Party, which polled a little over 3% in last year's elections, has turned out to support the protest. Frattoriani is from Tuscany, but he says he has taken the struggle to heart because what is happening here is indicative of what is happening all over. An alliance of the dark right neo fascist and bigoted conservatives waging a cultural and ideological war. These people want to take us back to medieval times. That's right. And this is how Europe views these things. In America, traditionalists think that medieval times is great. Most people in Europe, just as in the Guelph Ghibelline controversy, most people in Europe think it's absolutely retarded. Uh, it's just these brainwashed people who think that the medieval times were great. According to Frattoriani, in seeking to radicalize Europe, Bannon and his friends want to roll back on hard-won rights on abortion and gay marriage. Since a populist coalition made up of anti-establishment Five-Star Movement and the right-wing League took power in Italy last June, there has been a palpable impact, he says. There have been more attacks on women. The Nazi and fascist parties have raised their heads again. This is not my country. Now, if I remember, the Five-Star Movement has connections back to fascism. It's supposed to be this, it was with Beppe Grillo, it's supposed to be this great, and Goldman Sachs, where I think Steve Bannon has connections. It's so obvious they're controlled, but that's why they come out with all these little parties and all these little movements and all these things with their particularities. They are all essentially controlled by the same forces. It's just a destabilization effort. It's called counterinsurgency. As they ascend the mountain, herding dogs and children, the protesters in festive spirits, ABBA plays on large speaker and rainbow flags fly high. Wow, that's really going to stop them. A week later, behind the high gates at Trisolti, Bannon tours the site, dressed down in t-shirt, khakis, and workman boots, his hair slicked back. He projects a breezy confidence, waving away charges of neo-fascism. He says, fascism is worship of the state. We don't want an all-powerful state, he says. Now, this is what you have to realize. The modern fascists perfectly aligned with the pan-Europeans. We don't want an all-powerful state. We are the exact opposite of that. The state that has to get out of most aspects of people's lives. So I think we are the true anti-fascists. Bannon is eager to show off what he calls his Gladiator School in the making. And for the centuries monks lived there in peaceful contemplation, the monastery can feel more like a fortress than a holy site. It was built on the hunting grounds of the Counts of Segni by Lothario Segni, who became Pope Innocent III, the driving force behind the Fourth Crusade. There's the Venetian connection. The Fourth Crusade was organized on behalf of romanticists of the old empire when it was split up into quadrants. The Venetians took, I forget, so some Byzantine emperor was deposed, and the Venetians said, "Well, we're going to help you get your throne back." This is why people like J. Dyer talk about orthodoxy and the Fourth Crusades where the Catholics fought. No, the Byzantines came to the Venetians and said, "We're going to have this crusade," and then they sacked Constantinople with the help of Byzantines that were deposed, Byzantine ebrige. And this was with a great friend of the Byzantine Empire, which was the Venetians. They were constantly playing sides. But had retained a good connection with the Byzantines. So now they're in this Venetian Black Guelph monastery, operating this right wing to a pan-European movement. He gifted this to the Carthusians. I forget what the Carthusians did. Recently I've heard things about them, and I need to look more into that. An imposing 8-foot crucifix marks the entrance, while high boundary walls serve to create a citadel-like structure with a commanding view down the valley. In 2017, the Italian Ministry of Culture agreed to lease the monastery to the religious lobbying group Dignitatis Humanae Institute, DHI, for 19 years at a rent of €10,000 a year, €100,000 a year. The ultra-conservative Catholic organization seeks to bind legislators to pro-life and anti-euthanasia policies. Wasn't that nice that they at least include anti-euthanasia? More so, I think, than some of the American pro-life groups, which are only anti-abortion. But they don't go farther than that, huh? As well as Bannon grandees, including the American Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is also, at least was, head of Knights of Malta, Pope Francis' antagonist in chief. Burke and Bannon first bonded in 2014 and share an opposition to Francis's handling of the clerical abuse crisis, his support for migrants, and his perceived socialist leanings. As he walked through the terracotta portico, Bannon describes his feeling overwhelmed when he came to Tresolti for the first time. I had seen pictures, drawings, but when you come here, see how ancient it is, and the scale of it, it blew me away. Its locations near Rome is symbolic, he says. Rome, along with Jerusalem and Athens, has been the center of Judeo-Christian West. Athens, which was controlled essentially by a Dionysian Apollinian cult system, and killed Socrates based on its oligarchy. And then Rome and Jerusalem. In some sense, yes, but these people, Bannon kind of seems like he's a Zionist, right? All of these people are Zionists. The Hof-Juden system is inherently Zionist. And practically, I'm not anti-Israel anymore. Meaning, what are you going to do? Take everybody out of Israel and put the Palestinians back in? It's stupid. But I'm definitely not the right-wing Netanyahu Likud party type person who, in his own right, is bad for the Israeli left and Israeli students and all of these people that need the social safety net. But going on, he says the reason I spend so much time here is the great experiment that's being done with the 5-star league and the league, center-left populism and center-right nationalism combined to form a national government. Goldman Sachs. It's the equivalent of Trump's deplorables with Bernie Sanders guys. So Bernie Sanders, UBI, things like this. Milton Friedman, Trump's economics. Somewhat actually better than Milton Friedman, but same kind of people. American Enterprise Institute, whatever. In 1947, in a true-life murder mystery worthy of Umberto Eco novel, the monastery's prior was shot dead in frescoed chambers. An investigation led to the monastery being disbanded and the monks scattered to the four corners of Italy. The official reason is finance, but maybe it was a homosexual thing, says Bannon, so it was quite controversial that the real reason is, but we don't delve into that. Although we are going to have an exorcism here. The monks were replaced by a different order, the Cistercians, but vocations plummeted in just one solitary octogenarian monk, Don Ignazio, remains. Apart from Chef Gardner, the only other inhabitant is Benjamin Harnwell, a conservative British Catholic, just like Lord Conrad Black, a British Zionist conservative Catholic that runs around with all sorts of Mossad guys. From a friend of Jeff Epstein. Harnwell, an enthusiastic sidekick to Bannon, hey, look at this, is the prospective principal of the academy. While Bannon will be in charge of vision and fundraising, he says, formerly chief of the staff to conservative British MEP Nirj Deva, Harnwell now prefers UKIP and voted for the UK to leave EU. That whole thing controlled by some of the biggest backers of Trump, um, the not Baring brothers. Who's still alive? Barclay, Barclay Bank. And they actually had Stephen Barclay run the Brexit committee. He can't wait to get started. We have this place for 20 years, enough time to change the world. Looking out over the former hunting grounds, Bannon describes his vision. Come back here in a few years and you'll find 100 students, 20 to 25 faculty and staff. You've already had a couple classes graduate by then, and people are back in the media, back in political campaigns, serving as junior ministers in the government, and starting to build a network. I think this academy will start to build a cadre. The objective is to identify and accelerate young talent earlier. He pointed to Beatrix von Storch of Germany's AfD, Sebastian Kurz of the Austrian People Party, and Marion Marikel, firebrand granddaughter of Jean-Marie Le Pen, who she goes back to these leftist synarchist networks, like not the Renegades, but these Le Circle stay behind networks that posed as radical leftists and killed people like Aldo Moro or whoever, these middle of the line industrialist people, Republicans. Going, maybe you can pull out and see Matteo Salvini or Marion Maréchal earlier and help them get ahead. If we see these types of people in 10 years downrange, we'd be an enormous success. Could the Academy produce the next Trump? He responds diplomatically, well, Trump is Trump, but we definitely hope the generation, the next Tom Cottons, Mike Pompeo's, Nikki Haley's, the next generation that follows Trump. It's hard to tell how many of the market is out there for the Academy or how successful it will be. Harnwell claims that hundreds have already applied, from everywhere, including the UK. Bannon is seeking official accreditation from one of the several Catholic U.S. universities in order to offer graduates of the course an official master's qualification. He sees this as a prerequisite, he says, to be taken seriously to justify the proposed fee of $45,000 to $550,000, but it's worth taking 6 to 9 months out from their lives. The first of several 2 to 4 week pilot courses is due to start in this year, Bannon says. Applicants don't need to be Catholic or religious. Ecumenicism in the new sense. But we clearly want people that support populism and economic nationalism, and I imagine Marxists won't want to come here. Bannon admits he would like to roll back the clock of progress, if not to medieval times, then to the late 19th century Victorian era, which was the height of the British Empire. That's not, I added that, but this is a quote. Bannon admits he would like to roll back the clock of progress, if not to the medieval times, then to the late 19th century Victorian era. It was a time of much more unity of family and more traditional values. People knew a moral code and tried to live that code. It didn't seem to be the social anarchy we see today. Meanwhile, all these people were covering up piano legs because they were sexual, but Queen Victoria was taking cocaine, carrying out massacres in other countries, promoting the occult in all corners of the earth through the British Foreign Office, and personally contacting the dead and doing all sorts of weird woo-woo. The syllabus will include a grounding in his version of world events, including classical and church history, art, and finance. The tenets of Judeo-Christian Western... Sorry, the sports ball people are screaming. I don't know if you can hear sports ball people, but the sports ball people are screaming. I think this is a little more important than sports ball. The tenets of Judeo-Christian Western culture, as he calls it, a second self-empowerment module will include public speaking and leadership teaching how to get things done, how to fall back on yourself. A third segment will focus on how media can be used to drive a narrative, practical politics, and running campaigns. Will this be Bannon's specialist area? I'm not really a campaign guy. I've only done one campaign. Not that bad. I drew an insight straight. The aim is not to produce neo-fascist dictatorships, he insists. He tells you it's not about nationalism. He says, I think you can also teach the pitfalls of nationalism, of people like Mussolini and Hitler and guys like that. You got to teach the downside. Some things started off as populist and went into other directions. All that has got to be taught and can be taught. The Academy will, he hopes, become part of a network with student and faculty exchanges with existing programs such as Marion Maréchal's Institute of Social, Economic, and Political Sciences in Lyon and the School of Political Education in Milan, which is run by Armando Siri, MP for the League and Undersecretary for Transport. Bannon's fantasy facility would include high profile political figures such as Olavo de Carvalho, the supposed guru of Brazil's far right President Jair Bolsonaro. The vehemently anti communist writer and self taught philosopher has championed some individual liberties, such as the right to bear arms, while vilifying everything from globalism to Islam, feminism, homosexuality, and the left in general. Now, if we actually look at a list of who Bannon also supports, the fantasy faculty, which we're going to look into, it's going to include people with a lot of leanings towards the pan European view. They just throw in these people who have um, conservative views because their straw man is conservatism. Meanwhile, they don't realize this is synarchy. This is syncretic. It's the romantic kind of superhero Justice League or Avengers or whatever the hell. I don't comic ball um, of all these different interests that come together, but secretly behind the scenes, whatever frame you give them is what they're going to promote. Um, he has expressed doubt. So this guy, this far right president Jair Bolsonaro, or his guru, has expressed doubt about Darwin's theory of evolution. So the typical kind of Darwin's theory is it's a Fabian idea, or extremely promoted by the Fabians, anyway. And he claimed that the Inquisition was a fiction invented by the Protestants. Now, this sounds a lot like the tradition, family, and property group that's run by the Hapsburgs and the Turn on Taxes family, um, meaning they operate out of Brazil and are highly influential in that. So we'll need to look into this. D. Carvalho said he wanted to join the facility, the faculty, says Bannon. D. Carvalho did not respond to FD's request for comment. He also dreams of inviting political and religious authorities such as Salvini, Orban, and Cardinal Burke to coach short immersion courses. And there's a lot more here. Uh, Bannon says he aims to finance the project with donations from wealthy Catholics in Italy, Europe, and US, but that for now, it is paid for 100% by Stephen K. Bannon. The German billionaire, res and doyen of Rome's conservative Catholic scene, Princess Gloria von Turn-on-Taxis, has offered her castle in Germany as a second campus, he says. And I believe that is a Nazi castle in Regensburg that was used as a headquarters for Allgemeine SS, but I have not found any sort of documentation further than the Executive Intelligence Review articles on it. Backing from Russians is ruled out, even though, as he says, their interests might be aligned because with kleptocracy and magnates, the oligarchs, it's just not my deal. He says he does not expect contributions from his erstwhile backers, the Mercer family, who broke ties with him at the same time Trump did. They are fantastic, but they are more libertarian and agnostic, so it's not that they would naturally see fit here. Tresolti retains much from the monk's era, the austere cells, refectory lined with wooden pews, the religious icons. The Spartan environment is part of the experience. This is another thing with traditional Catholics, is they look at Sparta as some great thing. The Spartans founded the Helot system, which is feudalism. Spartans were ruled by the Apollyon, more the Apollyon type cults of that time, but they were ruled by an oligarchy as well. Going on, while some refurbishment is needed, in many ways the Academy seems ready for class of 2019 with empty desks and chair ready. Yet not everyone takes Bannon's ambition seriously. Jan Werner Miller, a professor of politics at Princeton, believes it is unlikely Bannon has anything meaningful to offer Europe's wannabe populists. There's criticisms about it from intellectuals and professors. Which is all kind of boring things. So you didn't invent populism. How can you offer anything special? Well, it's not Steve Bannon. It's the Turn of Taxes family and these Catholic populace in UK. It's just people in Europe look to Americans sometimes for leadership. They hate Americans, but simultaneously they look to Americans for leadership. And that's kind of ingrained in their brain since World War II. Do you not understand that? The kind of psychological warfare that has implanted itself in the European mindset. Okay, indeed, the obstacles in Bannon's path appear to be multiplying. First, the mayor of Colpardo Spring, a surprise tax bill of 80,000 euros a year on his DHI, which is the Dignitatis Humani Institute. When the FT refers to this, Bannon looks momentarily rattled, then adopts a Trump-like nonchalance. They're adding some taxes and things like that. We will negotiate all that out. Just write a check. It's like any deal, and of course, the other guy's going to try and throw things onto it. It's normal, of course, business. Not anything surprising or out of the ordinary. Um, so it talks about it was misrepresenting its. So there's questions to its use as because it's a historical building. It's all boring. Um, some Coppola's not probably not related to Francis Ford to complain. There's a danger that our homes become a reference point for populist neo-fascism. Blah blah blah. Excuse me. Okay, so this is an article by Hannah Roberts. That's all done. So we have a lot of questions, kind of defining this whole like this guy, this UK guy that's working with Bannon. Seems to have a lot more influence than Bannon. The link to Gloria Turner Taxis. Um, who's on his fantasy faculty? How is Brazil's right wing uh, leader linked to tradition, family, and property, which is another Hapsburg asset? We'll figure all these things out, hopefully in the future. But this is amazing. I love it. This is a very cool. This is the kind of thing that the LaRouche organization used to cover, and now they won't because they sided with the Council for National Policy and these individuals. But this is just a crazy thing to watch. This is kind of one of the clown world things. If they end up using that Nazi castle as a second campus. So anyway, like and subscribe. I read old magazines, and if you like this kind of material, I have a lot more of it. A lot of it's just old executive intelligence review stuff, and then I take those connections and I look. My plan is to read a lot of other stuff, some of Ray Pete's um, material, and kind of unknown science articles and stuff like this. But right now, this is my main concern, and this is what people seem to care about. So have a good night. I think this is my last video for tonight. I'm kind of addicted whenever I get a lead like this, so bear with me. I could keep you up all night, but I'm going to say good night. God bless you, and thanks for watching.